This is not just a story of a man. It is a story of a pain not caused by choice, a hurried escape, a fall that left an eternal mark, and of an unexpected, surprising grace that arrives when everything seems lost. It is a story of someone who lost everything but found a place where no one judged him by his appearance, where no one saw him as defective, where he was treated as a son, even though he saw himself as a burden. His name was Mephiboshet, and his story begins long before the fall. It begins with a name, a lineage, an invisible war between thrones, promises, and blood covenants. Let us go back in time, before the fall, before the escape, before the pain. It was a normal morning in the palace of Gibeah. The sun entered softly through the tall windows, passing through pure linen curtains. The aroma of spices in the air mixed with the sounds of servants in motion, preparing the royal table. Guards marched with precision through the stone corridors. Everything seemed in order, the appearance of stability. But behind the curtains and golden walls, Saul's kingdom was already trembling in silence. While generals gathered in secret and messengers arrived with war reports, a child ran through the central hall laughing. Mephiboshet, small, innocent, unconcerned with the attention of adults, played with pieces of cloth that he imagined were swords and capes. The palace was his playground. Each column, a fortress, each staircase, a castle of adventure. What he did not yet know was that his name carried the weight of generations. He was the grandson of Saul, the first king of Israel, and the son of Jonathan, the nation's most respected warrior and David's loyal friend. Jonathan was known for his courage, wisdom, and compassion. And even as he heir to the throne, he did something unthinkable. He renounced power out of love for truth, out of love for David. His bond of friendship was stronger than any political ambition. Jonathan knew David was God's chosen one, yet he did not feel envy. He felt honor. In those days, the kingdoms lived in constant tension. The Philistines threatened the borders. Rebels emerged in every corner, and even within Israel, distrust was growing. The people were divided between Saul's tradition and the promise upon David. Meanwhile, Mephibosheth kept playing. His small hands held a wooden staff as if it were a spear. He made noises with his mouth, simulating battles that existed only in his imagination. Behind him, the nurse followed, smiling. She called him sweetly, "My prince, be careful." But he only laughed, running through the palace corridors as if he owned everything. He did not know that it would be the last day he would run. A few kilometers away, in a battlefield consumed by dust and blood, Saul's final battle was unfolding. The king, already weary, faced his last moments. Jonathan, at his father's side, fought with honor, but fate was written. The royal lineage was about to be broken, not by politics, not by strategy, but by something no one expected. The divine would raise a new throne, a new house, and fulfill a promise made to a shepherd named David. While all this happened in the palace, Mephibosheth ran, played, and smiled, unaware that his time of innocence was about to end. The morning still carried its appearance of normalcy. Servants hurriedly cleaned the corridors. A strong scent of oil and iron began to invade the air, as if the palace itself sensed something. Outside, dust rose on the horizon. Messengers came and went in haste, but none dared speak aloud. Something loomed over Gibeah, a strange, uncomfortable silence, like the moment before a storm. Then the gates burst open with a violent crack. The sound echoed like thunder through the marble corridors. A man stumbled in, his clothes torn, dust on his face. The blood on his tunic was not just his own. He had crossed the battlefield to bring news no one wanted to hear. His eyes were wide, his voice trembling. He looked directly at the guards and shouted, Saul is dead. Jonathan too. It was as if time had stopped. The words seemed to pierce the walls, the halls, the ground. In the next room, Mephiboshet's nurse heard them. She froze, petrified. The cloth she had been using to wipe the boy's face slipped from her hands. Her eyes filled with tears. She knew what it meant. The royal lineage had been cut. The throne was empty. And in the customs of neighboring kingdoms, when a new king rose, the old lineage was destroyed, not for security, but out of fear, so that no one could claim the throne again. She looked at Mephiboshet, who still played, laughing, mimicking battle sounds with a wooden staff. Innocent, unaware of the tragedy that had just struck his household, the woman's heart raced. She knew there was no time for explanations or farewells, only for escape. She picked him up urgently and ran. Hallways, staircases, gates. With shouts and whispers, chaos spread throughout the palace. Other servants tried to flee. Some gathered belongings, but she had only one goal: to save the child. In her arms, Mephiboshet was frightened. He didn't understand. He tried to ask something, but her breath was too heavy to answer. With every step, desperation grew. The weight of the child in her arms, the pain intensifying her legs, the fear that at any moment someone might appear to take the boy's life. And then she stumbled. Time seemed to slow, as if everything was happening in slow motion. Her foot slipped on the stones of the courtyard. She tried to regain balance, but the weight in her arms pulled her forward. Mephiboshet fell. The small body hit the cold stones of the ground with force. The dry sound of the impact was piercing. A sharp cry tore through the air. She tried to rise quickly, ran to him, but when she tried to help him stand, he couldn't. His legs were immobile, useless. Something had broken inside. He was only 5 years old, and in that moment, he lost the ability to walk. His gaze changed. The physical pain was immense, but the emotional pain was even greater. Not just because of the fracture itself, but because everything collapsed at once. The throne, the family, the dreams, the freedom. She held him tightly, trying to ask for forgiveness, though she couldn't form the words. Her tears fell onto the boy's face, now silently crying, unable to understand, unable to react. In that moment, the prince fell. But it was not just a physical fall, it was a fall of an identity. It was the beginning of a life of silence, of hiding, where pain would become routine and shame a constant companion. The child who once ran to the palace corridors would now be carried, concealed, forgotten. That day, the sound of war silenced laughter, and the fall sealed the fate of a boy born to be a prince but destined to grow up as no one. Lodabar, the name of the place, said everything. No pasture, no word, no communication, no hope. It was a forgotten village, buried between dry hills and lands cracked by the sun. Nothing flourished there, not the soil, not dreams. It was where those who wanted to disappear hid, where those who had nowhere else to go sought refuge. It was there that Mephiboshet grew up. Years passed, and the boy who once ran freely through the palace corridors now crawled through corridors of mud. He lived in hiding in the house of Makir, a generous man, but one who also carried his own burdens. The house was simple. The roof leaked on rainy days. The bread was hard. The water sometimes scarce. But poverty was not what hurt the most. It was the memory. Mephiboshet spent hours staring into nothingness. One night, sitting beneath the only dry tree in the yard, he asked himself, not for the first time, why? Why me? Why did my story have to be marked by tragedy, by loss, by a fall I did not cause? In Lodabar, there were no doctors, no promises, no dreams. It was there that he became a man. There, he learned to survive without truly living. Sometimes, as he washed his face in the small stream that crossed the village, he saw his reflection and asked, "Does God still remember me?" But the water did not answer. It was in Lodabar that he learned to live with fear. Fear of being discovered. Fear of being remembered. Fear of hoping for something only to be disappointed again. And so, Mephiboshet became a man, crippled in his feet, wounded in his soul. He bore the name of a prince, but the heart of a fugitive. He had a story of royalty, but the reality of exile. He thought to himself, maybe this is my end. Maybe the fate of those who fall is simply to disappear. Little did he know that heaven had written another chapter, and that even in Lodabar, grace would still find a way. Jerusalem, the city of the great king, was now established under David's rule. The battles had been won. The throne was secure, the enemies silenced, the nation at peace. But not all wars are fought with swords. Some take place in the silence of the heart. King David had everything: wealth, influence, respect. Yet one night, while musicians played and counselors debated laws, the king stepped away from a room. He walked through the palace corridors, now with slow steps, as if searching for something he could not name. He stopped before a balcony and looked out toward the horizon. The moon cast its silvery glow over the rooftops of Jerusalem. But the king's eyes were fixed not on the landscape, but on the past. His heart suddenly overflowed with memories. Memories of a friend, a brother in spirit, someone who stood by his side when no one else did. Jonathan. The memory of that face was vivid. The sound of his voice, the strong embrace, the oath made in the midst of the field under a starry sky. Promise me, David, that you will be kind to my descendants even after I am no longer here. And David had promised, with tears in his eyes, with a heavy heart, with a soul bound in covenant. But years had passed, wars had come, life had unfolded, and that promise had remained locked away like a forgotten document in the depths of a drawer. Until that night, something awakened within him, as if God had breathed upon his memory. Do you remember what you promised? The next morning, the king summoned his closest servants. The hall was filled with leaders, scribes, men of war. But the question he asked surprised everyone. Is there still anyone left of Saul's house to whom I may show kindness for the sake of Jonathan? Silence. Some exchanged glances. Others lowered their heads. A name emerged from the lips of a servant. Ziba. Ziba had served Saul for years and now served David. He knew the paths of the past, and when brought before the king, he heard the question again. Is there still anyone left of Saul's house? Ziba hesitated, but then answered, There is still one, a son of Jonathan, crippled in his feet. He lives in Lodabar. David asked no further questions. He did not inquire whether he was strong, whether he was worthy, whether he was useful to the kingdom. He simply commanded, Bring him to me. At that moment, the forgotten promise was reignited, destiny was redirected, and a journey began, because the heart of the king still beat for someone whom everyone else had left in oblivion, and the forgotten name of a crippled man in Lodabar had just been remembered at the throne of Israel. The sun was already high over the hills of Lodabar. The red dust rose in the distance, announcing the arrival of something unusual. Horses, guards, banners. A royal entourage was crossing the desert toward a place no one expected kings to remember. Movement was rare on those forgotten paths. Visitors did not come there. Invitations were not sent. But that morning, the king had sent his word. As the villagers watched with suspicion and fear, the soldiers stopped in front of the house of Machir. They knocked firmly on the door. Knock, knock, knock. For a moment, world seemed frozen. Inside the house, Mephiboshet felt a shiver run down his spine. The sound of the knocking brought back a familiar, ancient fear. He looked at his nurse, now older, who observed him with anxious eyes. He looked down at the dusty ground and silently thought, "This is it. They have come to kill me. After all these years, they have finally found me." For a moment, he considered running. But where? With his crippled feet? With his wounded story? There was nowhere to run. The door opened slowly. The soldiers did not draw their swords. They did not call him a rebel. They did not accuse him of anything. One of them, with a solemn expression, simply said, "Mephiboshet, son of Jonathan, the King David wishes to see you." The word struck him like lightning in his mind. His name, his ancestors, and David, the new king, the former rival of his grandfather, the friend of his father. His heart raced. Why now? What does he want with me? Is this vengeance disguised as kindness? Is it mercy or a trap? Mephiboshet lowered his eyes. Childhood memories crashed over him like violent waves. The palace corridors, his father's face, the fall, the exile, the silence. He said nothing, only nodded, and was placed upon an animal, surrounded by soldiers, carried back to the place he once called home. But he was no longer the same. He was no longer the boy who ran between golden columns. He was a broken man, head bowed, full of questions, completely unprepared for what was to come. As the horses advanced toward Jerusalem, he did not know that he was not being taken to judgment, but to a reunion with grace. The journey was long. Mephiboshet kept his eyes fixed on the ground nearly the entire way. He did not want to see the soldiers' gazes. He did not want to feel the weight of doubt in every face that watched him. As they approached Jerusalem's walls, his breathing grew heavier. His heartbeat was erratic, with every step closer to the palace. It felt as though he was walking toward a courtroom where his sentence had already been decided. Finally, they arrived. Gates opened. Guards lined up. Trumpets sounded in the distance. But Mephiboshet heard none of it clearly. His mind was drowning in voices from the past. You no longer belong here. You are just a cripple. They will laugh at you. You are a disgrace to the royal lineage. He tried to take a deep breath, tried to appear calm, but inside he was completely shattered. Guided by two soldiers, he entered the great royal hall. The towering columns, the rich tapestries, the light filtering through stained glass, it all felt so distant, so unreachable. And then he saw him, David, the king, the man who now occupied the throne that had once belonged to his grandfather, the man who had shared his soul with Jonathan, the man who perhaps had come to finish what the war had started. As Mephiboshet approached, he staggered. His feet could hardly support him, his soul even less. And then he fell face down to the ground, too ashamed to lift his eyes. With a weak voice, drenched in humiliation, he said, "Who is your servant that you should look upon a dead dog like me?" Silence. For a moment, everything stopped. Then David stood. The king's footsteps echoed to the hall, but with an unusual gentleness. He approached slowly, looked down at the fallen man, and did not see only crippled legs, did not see only the rags of poverty. He saw the son of his friend. He saw the promise he had made under the heavens. He saw someone whom grace had chosen to restore. David then spoke, his voice firm, filled with emotion. Mephiboshet. The man on the ground trembled at the sound of his name, not as an accusation, not as a judgment, but as a calling, a rescue. Do not fear. I will restore to you the lands that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will eat bread at my table every day of your life. Those words struck like thunder, mercy breaking through decades of silence. Mephiboshet could hardly comprehend. Me a dead dog? Me, crippled, forgotten, humiliated, unworthy? But there, before the king, he discovered that grace does not wait for perfection. It only waits for presence and obedience to the call. David ordered a place to be set for him at the table. Not at the end, not among the servants, but among the sons. Yes, among the sons. The man with crippled feet now sat among princes, ate with the king's children, and lived under the shelter of the promise every day. But there was something even more powerful than the food. It was what the table concealed. There, no one saw his feet. There, no one saw his limitations. There, he was not remembered for his fall. He was remembered for his calling in the presence of the king. His traumas no longer spoke the loudest. His scars no longer defined his worth. His story was no longer a trail of pain. It was a testimony of redemption. The story of Mephiboshet is not just a biblical remembrance. It is a mirror, a reflection. How many of us have fallen? How many of us have stumbled to the chaos of life and been scarred by pains that were not always our fault? How many of us have grown up in emotional Lodebars, places without hope, without words, without sound? How many of us still hear the voices of the past whispering, "You are not worthy. You are too broken. You have been forgotten"? But today, the king is calling again. He asks, "Is there anyone to whom I may show kindness?" And the answer is you who carry trauma, you who have lost your identity, you who have lived in hiding, you who feel distant from the promise. The invitation is not for the deserving. It is for the broken, for those who believe they have no more chances, for those who have already given up trying to walk on their own strength. The king's table is still set, and there is a place with your name. Yes, with your name. Because at the table of grace, crippled feet are not seen, only a restored heart and a love that covers the past. You may have fallen, but the king has not forgotten you. You may see yourself as unworthy, but he still calls you his child. And if today you hear his voice knocking at the door of your Lodabar, do not run. Simply say, "Here I am," and grace will lift you up. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone living hidden in an emotional Lodabar, share this message. Perhaps today, grace will also find its way to them. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal the light behind the shadows.